Okay, so we get to chapter 16, and now they've come out of these three things that they learned about their sinfulness, and they recognize the heinousness of sin, and then they roll into chapter 16, and this begins a hidden agenda of some people. I want you to see that you have to move to understanding Moses' leadership in the face of rebels. What's interesting is God dealt with rebels by killing them. Moses couldn't quite do the same thing. So Moses had to have a sense of how to deal with the rebellion of people. And what's interesting is, if you look into the passage, first of all, there's a challenge that's made to him in verses 1, 2, and 3. Korah, the son of Itzhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi or Levi, Datan, and Abiram, the sons of Eliav, and On, the son of Peleth, the sons of Reuben, took action. They rose up before Moses, together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said, "You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" Now stop there for a second. Did you notice that the command of the decoration symbol for the holiness of the people was given in the declarative law at the end of chapter 15, just before the story of the rebellion where they get up and say, "All of us are holy to the Lord"? You understand why that law is inserted? Because I don't think that Moses is writing this in order. I think this is the next thing that happened, but so that you understood why these guys thought they were all holy before the Lord. Because you got to be asking yourself, if he had followed this up with the body bags and you'd be going, "You're holy to the Lord, my eye." You guys are running off in every direction, constantly whining, complaining. It's amazing God didn't smite you all, and you're walking around going, "We're all holy to the Lord." But because of that insert of the tassels, it helps you understand that they felt God had given them ornamentation that made them all special to the Lord. So I want you to see that in the result of that, what they're saying is, "Who made you boss?" That's what this is. If I had to write something now, "Who made you boss, Mo? We're all pretty good." Now, the interesting thing is there's a couple of problems in what they said. The first issue of the text was a source problem. The people were chosen to come how? How did they all rise up? The 250 plus the leaders were all brought together because of what? What were they at the end of verse 2?
They were chosen and men of renown.
Men of renown. Just say famous people. They're chosen because they're famous. Now, the problem is, that doesn't make them right. It just makes them famous. I just cannot understand why they keep asking actors about political questions. What about acting school qualified you to know anything about a healthcare plan? Which part of clown school gave you a really good insight into what the next thing we should do in a military situation is? I mean, come on. And so one of the things you have to do is you walk around going, just because they're famous doesn't mean they're right. Some people, honestly, they'll strip off their clothes just to get famous. There's no shame involved. They just want to be famous. They don't care. Now, the second issue is their conclusion problem. What's the conclusion that these men drew that caused them to walk up and stand against Moses? They got the people together. They expressed an ultimatum. That's enough. And then they made their misstatement. The men argued, because all the congregation is holy and every one of them and the Lord is in their midst, is a half-truth. God did dwell in their midst, but they weren't all holy. Okay? So, never mind that the people hadn't met God personally and Moses had. Never mind that they hadn't been called by God to do the work and Moses was. They're stepping past this. See, God's leaders are called by God. So they make an accusation, and notice they asked why, not if, Moses and Aaron exalted themselves. They didn't say, "Why do you guys exalt themselves?" They said, "You guys exalt yourselves. Why do you do that?" in essence, the jury reached a verdict before the discussion. We've already declared that you are guilty of misleading us. Now we'd just like to know why. And Moses and Aaron are standing there like, you concluded we did wrong when? Let's get back to the facts. Moses got the job because God gave it to him. He fought against the call of God. Don't you remember that? He didn't want the job. So it wasn't about him running around going, I'm so important. He didn't want to lead them. God made him. And a true examination of the record would force any reasonable person to conclude that Moses was not hungry for power. He was being obedient to what God told him to do. So how was Moses to lead in the face of this kind of rebellion? Verses 4 through 19 give a series of things he did to step back or push back. So 1 through 3 is the accusation. 4 through 19 is his actions taken against the rebels. And the first thing he did, I'm going to say in 2 words in verses 4 through 7, is he stood up. When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. He spoke to Korah and all his company. Tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and he will bring him near to himself, even the one whom he will choose. He will bring him near to himself. Do this. Take censers for yourselves, Korah and all your company. Put fire in them and lay incense upon them in the presence of the Lord tomorrow. And the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the one who is holy. You have gone far enough, you sons of Levi. By the way, look at the last part, because that's where he stood up. That's enough. But not only did he stand up, he also fell down. Did you notice at the very beginning? Moses heard this and he fell on his face. What a godly man was supposed to act like was he took charge of the situation, but not until after he fell on his face to be humble. It's not enough for you to take charge of the situation. There's also humility that must come in it. So he humbled himself and then took charge. That is so not the way we do things. And then the third thing he did was spoke out. He did not leave them unsure about what to do next. In fact, what I think is interesting is if you look at verses 8 through 11, he clarified the issues of exactly what was happening. Moses said to Korah, "Hear now, you sons of Levi, is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them, and that he has brought you near, Korah, and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you? And you are seeking the priesthood also? Therefore you should also, all your company are gathered together against the Lord. But as for Aaron, who is he that you grumble against him?" It seems like behind the scenes what brought this about was the Levites wanted the role of priests. Now remember, there was a select group within the Levitical family that were priests, the Kohanim. But the rest of them were garden variety Levites that took care of the tabernacle. And Moses says, how dare you come at the priests and say, we ought to be priests too. God didn't have you born in their line. That's not up to you. That's up to God. Moses perceived that they wanted something more. They wanted to lead. Now here's the problem. The leadership of the tabernacle wasn't up to Moses. It was established by God. They wanted the position of priest. Again, Moses couldn't make them priests. Only God could. So they're asking for something that Aaron and Moses can't give them because God didn't give it to them. I've been in this situation. I've had some young ladies look right at me and tell me that I was stopping them from being in ministry because they believed they were supposed to be in a pulpit, and I said, not here. And that's just wrong. God's gifted me. And I looked at him and said, but I have the word of God that's commanded me not to let you do that. And I don't know what you want me to do about that. I didn't write this stuff. I'm just telling you it's there. Well, other people say it means something different. Fine, I'm not one of them. What do you want me to do? Violate what I understand the words to mean because somebody said they thought it was different? You want God to work in my heart? Ask him to work in my heart. I didn't ask to be in this position. I'm telling you, this is what it says. And I'll tell you what, I've had this circumstance come up 3 times in ministry, and all 3 times they walked out mad at me. All 3 times. I don't get to write the rules. I believe that most of you are going to find that the ball's going to move forward now. It's not going to be women. It's next it's going to be a gay community. I can't believe you won't let me teach Sunday school. No, you can come, but you can't teach. Why? Well, God told me it's okay. Yeah, but he didn't say that in his word. And I don't have the latitude to change it. I don't know what you want from me. I'm here to teach what's in front of you, not what you would like it to be. Here's what I find. I think people are willing to follow God as long as he'll say stuff they like. And the problem is, what if he says stuff we don't like? What does it have to do? Why does it matter whether I see how it connects? If God says it, that's the end of the story. So Moses is standing there going, what do you want from me? Verse 12 down to verse 14, Moses gives a message to the Reubenites. Now, remember that Reuben was supposed to be the leading tribe of the eldest, okay? Moses sent a summons to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, we will not come up. Is it not enough that you have brought us up out of the land of Egypt flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, but you would also lord it over us? Indeed, you have not brought us into the land flowing with milk and honey, nor have you given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of these men as well? We will not come up. Now, this is interesting. Moses sends for some guys to come and consult with him, and they say, we're not coming. So he's got an open rebellion on his hands. But Moses has to face this. So first thing he does is he says, I want to dialogue with the leaders, but they refuse to dialogue. And they bitterly argue for Moses withdrawing himself from the promises that he made. You didn't get us in the land of promise. You didn't do the things you said. They argued that Moses had brought them into the desert. They expressed that Moses did it for them to perish. By the way, a totally untrue assessment. I mean, really, think about it. Yes, I gave up my Midianite shepherding so I could come drag you out in the middle of the wilderness and watch you all die slowly, because that's really the kind of entertainment I wanted. They accused Moses of lording over them. They accused him of also... Here's the bottom line. Moses asked to meet, and he opened the door to hearing them out. That's what he did. Is that important? People are attacking your leadership. Is it a smart thing to open the door to hear them out? Yes. But here's the thing. They didn't show any respect to Moses. And here's what I want you to understand. You cannot lead if you cannot follow. You cannot lead if you cannot show respect. You cannot lead if you disagree in an immature manner. If you don't know how to grow up in your disagreements, then you can't lead. So what does Moses do? Moses is miffed. I mean, he's publicly snubbed. He's not just disrespected, he's openly challenged. He's angry, he's embarrassed, he's incensed with their lies. So what does he do? I know what I would do. I know exactly what I would do. I would go into my tent of meeting and I would say, "O Lord, smite them that they may die." Moses became very angry. He said to the Lord, "Do not regard their offering. I have not taken a single donkey from them, nor have I done harm to any of them." Why did he mention a single donkey? It's a play on words. I haven't taken a single donkey from them is quite literally, I haven't taken any of the jackasses from them. But he's also saying I haven't met with any of the jackasses from them either. I haven't gotten any of them to sit down and talk. He's playing with words. So he makes it clear, God, they really hurt my feelings. But here's the bottom line. God knows our frame. Don't forget that. He knows that no one likes to be lied about. No one likes to be put down. No one likes to be abused. Everybody wants to fire back in anger. He doesn't want us to shove it down inside. Listen to me. You're going to be told, take that anger and shove it down inside. No, don't. Give it to him. That's what you do with it. So go to your prayer and say, Lord, I am so mad I could just beat that guy to a pulp. I am really angry. Here's what you'll find. When you share it with the Lord, he'll take it out of your heart. It'll become easier to walk back in and see them. Share it with a friend and they will affirm your anger and you will get more anger. Share it with the Lord and the anger will be dispersed. Okay? Do what you want with what I'm telling you, but I'm telling you it works. And as a leader, I've been angry with plenty of people over time. What I think is interesting is that Moses gave an opportunity for the people to change. he wanted them to be able to change. Now, what's interesting is when you get down to verses 16 to 19, he stayed with the word. Look what he does. Moses spoke again to Korah, and he passed God's word on faithfully. Moses said to Korah, you and all your company be present before the Lord tomorrow, both you and they along with Aaron. Each of you take his fire pan, put incense on it. Each of you bring a censer before the Lord, 250 fire pans. You, Aaron, shall bring his fire pan. So they took their own censers, put their fire on it, laid incense on it, and they stood at the doorway of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. Thus Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the doorway of the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. Now what's interesting is God was ready to resolve the problem between them. What I think is kind of interesting is that God really was about to step in here. So when you look at what he does, God is not silent in their rebellion. Drop down to verse 20. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, notice that the Lord spoke out. That's important. God knows what's going on and God is about to speak. And God then called the people in rebellion to get away from the people that were not in rebellion, to get away from the people who were. He says, separate yourselves, verse 21, from among this congregation that I may consume them instantly. He says, step away from the car or there's going to be trouble. What he does is literally said, get away from these guys because I'm about to fry them into post toasties and I don't want to get you all singed. Now, I want you to realize for a minute when you see verse 21, these are offensive verses to non-believers and immature believers. The whole idea that God would judge sin is an offense to people who don't understand God. Toleration of sin is not the best strategy. Dealing with it is. And the whole world will cry, judgy, intolerant. That's true. But I want you to understand, if you go to the book of Acts, when Ananias and Sapphira lied, they were taken out in body bags. Do not look at God and tell him he can't make the rules for his universe. His rules for gravity are working out really well for me right now. Okay? Today's church needs to consider the pattern and be forewarned. God does judge sin. He really does. Look at verse 22. He can also show mercy, because that's what God does. Verse 22, they fell on their faces. Oh God, God of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be angry with an entire congregation? He says, don't do that. Don't go back against the entire group. Verse 23, God responds to our learning. He says, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the congregation, saying, get back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. So here's the thing. He will judge sin, but he tells them to get away from the tents. He says, okay, all right, I'm not going to kill all the people, but I'm going to get some of their stuff. Okay? So God comes down on some of their stuff. He says, back away from them. Look, it's foolish to attempt to hide from an all-seeing God. It really is. Okay? Don't think that because you know what I'll do? I'll hide under the covers and then God will never see me. He can't see me. I'll do it in the dark because God will really never know that. Seriously? I mean, you're seriously thinking that an all-seeing God who flung the stars in the universe is somehow bamboozled by your slickness of sin? I'll lie to God because he'll never be able to figure out that I'm not telling the truth. Hello? I'm inside your heart. So God warned Moses. Moses warned the people. Step away. Don't take any of that stuff they have with them. Step over the line. Don't go back. See, we have to be loving, but we have to be clear. And that's the part of this that I really think is important. I want you to notice the end phrase in verse 26. Look at the end phrase. There is a result of letting sin go. What is the end phrase in verse 26 that can be a result if we just tolerate sin?
Be swept away by it?
People are swept away by it. I want to flip past that. Go down to 27 to 35. I want you to see that God validates his work if you'll take the time to watch. What do I mean by he validates?
proves it to be true.
He proves it to be true. So in verse 27, so they got back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan and Abiram. Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the doorway of their tents, along with their wives, sons, and little ones. Moses said, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these deeds. This is not my doing." Would you underline, not my doing? I know what God is going to do, but don't mistake this. This is not hocus pocus. I'm not a magician. I'm not doing this. God is. If these men die the death of all men, or they suffer the fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about an entirely new thing, and the ground opens up its mouth and swallows them up with all that have spurned the Lord, and all that is theirs, and they descend alive into Sheol, then you will understand that these men have spurned the Lord. And he finished speaking these words. The ground under them was split open, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, and their households, and all the men who belonged to Korah with their possessions. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, into the grave. And the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. God said, I'm not even going to take their lives and then you have to bury them. I'm going to bury them myself. All Israel who were around them fled at their outcry, for they said, the earth may swallow us up. Fire also came forth from the Lord and consumed 250 men who were offering the incense. He told them to bring fire, but he had his own grill. He told them to bring the fire of incense. He didn't need their coals. He already had the interior of the earth coals. He was trying to make a point. Look, the longer we continue to ignore God's opportunities to step back from rebellion and rejection, the worse the conditions are going to get between what's right and what's wrong. Now, here's the bottom line. In 36 to 50, God called to righteousness, and what he does is he says, I want to give you a call to righteousness. I judge sin, and you better remember that I do. And that's what the end of this is all about. The Lord spoke to Moses, say to Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, he shall take up the censers out of the midst of the blaze, for they are holy, and scatter the burning coals abroad. He says, listen, I ate the people, I burned the people, but when I burned those guys, those 250 over there, I burned the people, but I left their censers. Go pick up the censers because those are holy. I mean, the guy holding it wasn't, but those were formed and fashioned before me to be used in worship for me. God defended the integrity of his word. He did it dramatically. And the story wasn't over yet. Because the bottom line is people were traumatized in one moment, but then look at what they do. I want you to ask yourself this question. If you had just seen people swallowed up by God in the earth, how many of you think you would probably live better the rest of the day? Look at verse 41. On the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Are you kidding me? What in the world is wrong with you people? Like, what do you need? The earth opened and swallowed up the people that grumbled yesterday. You might think about this. You are the ones that caused the death of the Lord's people. Verse 49, drop down to 49. Those who died by the plague were 14,700. What's the point of the passage? We live at this time, guys, listen to me for a minute, because I'm going to wrap this up, we're going to go to a break, but we live at a time when our society tries to play this victim song. It's your fault, you know. They'll frame it this way. It's not your fault you lost your property, the market went down. Yeah, but you speculated in a risk. That's what risk is. Okay? The reason I don't walk on high wires is it's a risk. If I walk on high wires and I fall, it's not the world's fault that I fell. Don't do it. It's a risk. It isn't my fault my marriage failed. I didn't have good role models growing up, so I cheated on my spouse. What? It isn't my fault I lost my job. It was a hard job, and I really struggled to do it every day. What? We excuse our bad choices. We walk around that, if you're poor, you lacked opportunity. If your schoolwork is substandard, it's because your teacher's not understanding enough. Come on, guys. We walk around singing this song of victimization. And what we have to understand is there comes a time when you have to step up and behave, and you need to understand that God isn't going to put up with your victim status. What I'm amazed at is the end of this passage stuck in my mind. I'm telling you, no matter what God does for the people, the next day they're going to forget. I mean, I think getting swallowed up in the earth, I think that would be a pretty dramatic thing. I think if I walked everybody out to the parking lot on next Sunday and I said, all right, there are a couple of you that do not want to follow the Lord. I want you to step right over here, and then the parking lot swallowed them. I'm thinking the rest of you would do what you were told, at least till the next day, but the next day they're turned right around and they're doing the same thing. In other words, it's not about what God does, it's about what we choose to do. That's what it's about. And it's always been about that. And here's the thing. I want you to know that when we get to chapter 17, he's got a mess of a thing he's got to clean up. Because every couple chapters, people are getting killed. Why? Because they keep rebelling. He cannot get them to follow him, and in the process, they keep making it worse for themselves. Okay, let's get into chapter 17. Now, you have been through a dramatic event. Friends have been swallowed up by the earth. 250 leaders have been fried where they stand. You've collected up the metal pieces of the incensers that were not fried when the people were fried that were holding them. You pretty much got a good graphic picture of a couple things. Number one, God is serious about sin. Number two, God is powerful. Number three, right after that, the sun went down, sun came up, we went right back to the same sin. If you're Moses, you're inside your tent saying what? Oh, please. How many people are we going to lose in this wilderness before you people will just shut up? But if you're the people, there's a lot of talk out there. One of the things that people keep doing, though, is ascribing the things that happen to the power of Moses, not the power of God. That happens all the way through ministry. You need to know that. When you go out and God uses you, people will think it's you. It's not you. Smart is the man or woman of God who knows that every good thing that comes from them is something God does, not something they did. Now, what's interesting is people needed in the face of rebellion some redirection. So if I have a single word for chapter 17, verses 1 through 12, the whole chapter, it's redirection. God wanted to redirect the people. Now, what does he do to redirect them? Do you all know how you stop a baby from being discontented?
Redirect their attention.
You redirect their attention. You refocus them on something else, preferably something shiny. Because they can be like, ah! It's that fast. But guess what? We are grown-up babies. And very often to get us, we'll be all whining about something and, oh, something shiny. Ooh. So in verses 1 to 5, God unfolds a plan. Look at the plan as it unfolds. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, speak to the sons of Israel, get them a rod for each of their father's household, 12 rods, sticks. Okay? Get them sticks, walking sticks. From all the leaders according to their father's households. You shall write each name on his rod. Now, here's what I want you to understand. People typically had walking sticks. And the ones that belonged to the leaders would have been decorated. Even today, in Arab circumstances in the desert, there's the staff of a great father or patriarch. Sometimes it's buried with him, but it has symbols on it that tells you who he is and what his life was about. You have to remember, he doesn't carry a business card, he carries a stick. He doesn't carry a daytimer, he carries a stick. That stick is the accompanying thing that goes with him. His cell phone is a stick. His memory is on the stick. So cool things that happen would often be engraved on the stick. So he says, everybody show up with the rods of their father's households. They would probably have different colors on them, different ribbons. You shall then deposit them in the tent of meeting in front of the testimony where I will meet you. Put your name on it and then put them all in the tent of testimony. It will come about that the rod of the man whom I choose will sprout. Thus I will lessen from upon myself the grumblings of the sons of Israel who are grumbling against you. So first, do you notice that in verses 1 to 5, God made the plan? Second, God's plan was to collect all the sticks. Third, God's objective was that I can quiet the grumbling, okay? I'm tired of listening to the grumbling, so this is how I'm going to deal with it. In verses 6 and 7, we went from the plan to now the pieces being collected. So in verses 6 and 7, the pieces get collected. Now that Moses therefore spoke to the sons of Israel, all their leaders gave them a rod apiece, each leader according to the father's households, 12 rods. Verse 7 says Moses deposited the rods before the Lord in the testimony, in the tent of the testimony. Now the word for rod in Hebrew is mateh. And so each one had a mateh, and it has several meanings. It can be a rod or a stick. It can be a marker or a monument or a standard. What's a standard? Like a flag that goes over top of soldiers to tell you what battalion they're in. And so the rod was sometimes in the Bible a means of chastisement, something you spanked children with. But most often it had to do with a marker that was the marker of the man. So God pulled together all the staff rods of the leaders of each tribe to make a point. Each one was a treasured piece that was part of that camp. The standard of each tribe was on the rod. It was just a stick, but it meant more to the people than just a stick. It was something that denoted the person that it went to. Symbols matter. I mean, it's just a flag, but it's our flag, and so it matters to us. So, the rod, I want you to think about that rod for a minute. What is God doing? First of all, the rod lived its natural life. Okay? It grew. Then they chopped it down. Now it's just a stick. Its life is over. It's going to be a memorial of things, but its life is over. The second thing is, in the right hands, the old wood increases in value. So here's the thing. God's leader took this stick and marked it, and now that stick became something more valuable, right? A third thing I know about the rod is, in support of God's leader, the stick offered stability and assistance. What did the stick do for an old man?
Offered support when he was walking.
Made him able to walk and gave him stability. The fourth thing I know is that the staff was a symbol of the man's identity. It was a symbol of his work, and he would carve on it and tell you things about his life. The fifth thing I know about it is that stick was important to that man whenever he was threatened or in trouble. Why? Snake comes into the tent. What's the first thing you do? Grab the stick. It becomes a club. It becomes a way of protecting your family. Now, get to verses 8, 9, 10, 11. The only catch is this. God only uses the stick that's put in his hands. So the stick has to be given to him in the tent of meeting for the stick to do anything cool. Okay? And all the rods are put in the tabernacle. It says, verse 8, now on the next day Moses went into the tent of testimony. Behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. So God takes this stick that's disconnected from the ground, grows sprouts out of it, grows nuts, and then fully matures the nuts all in one night. Why? Because when God touched the dead stick, two things happened that powerfully impacted the story. First of all, the dead rod became alive. The second one, the dead rod bore fruit. What's he doing? You place it in my presence and I'll take what is dead and make fruit out of it. I'll produce something out of it. It didn't only blossom, it was ripe fruit. What was impossible for man was possible with God. Now, Why do you suppose God did this? I mean, step back for a minute. Why would he do, look at the end of the chapter. What's he doing? The people have been through what? And now what does this provide?
Confirmation that Aaron is the leader.
Okay. Everybody, every commentator, every Bible teacher will tell you this helped put the stamp of approval on Aaron. That's true. But that's not the big thing he's doing.
Showing, let me figure, words. Pretty much showing that no matter what, God can bring back what they did.
Okay. It's absolutely true that they've been through a lot of death, and they need to see that God can bring life from it. That's true too. Here's the big thing he's doing. Oh, look, something shiny. What he's doing is taking their eyes off of repeated rebellions, repeated whining, repeated grumbling, and going, oh, look, the stick, it has fruit on it. And what he's trying to do is the whole transformation will happen if you'll put yourself in my presence and I will do this. Here's the thing, the people's lives were tied up in knots. And God wanted to loose them and transform them, but they had to give themselves to him. Some of you will get to the place, you will be amazed. You will just be going through a time when you feel like you're praying to the ceiling. It's not going anywhere. Things aren't happening. And right in the middle of that, God will give you this moment of victory that will be totally unexplainable. You didn't see coming, and all of a sudden it hits you, blindsides. And what he's trying to do is say, I'm not done with you. I'm just trying to refocus you on where I'm going. Okay, go to the last verse, 17:12. I want to pull the last verse over into chapter 18. And you have, then the sons of Israel spoke to Moses, saying, behold, we perish. We are dying. We are all dying. Everyone who comes near to the tabernacle of the Lord must die. Are we to perish completely? So the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons and your father's household with you shall bear the guilt in connection with the sanctuary, and you and your sons with you shall bear the guilt in connection with your priesthood. What's going on here? What is this about? People kept getting sick, and they kept dying of their illness. So they come and they say to Moses, we're getting sick and we're dying of our illness. And here's the thing. Moses turns and says, we need to address sin. What in the law would have been a violation that would have created illnesses that people were dying of? Think legally for a minute. Why are these people dying? I mean, they're dying because they're sinners. Okay, with sin brought death. But what's causing this? Think now about what you've learned of the law. Some of the laws related specifically to things that could bring death, like what?
Like the cleansing laws and stuff?
Exactly. The people are coming and they're dying, and Moses redirects them and says to the priests, you guys need to understand, you need to get on top of bearing the guilt for the sin, and you need to redirect what's happening with the people. Something was going on. We don't know what it was, but we do know that violations of hygienic laws and the things that would have kept them well were supposed to be directed by the priests, but the priests have had a distraction on their hands because they just had a full-scale revolt by the Levites. And so he says, okay, stop. First, you're never going to make an impact unless we clear up how the sin is being dealt with. And that's what verse 1 is about. By the way, it's going to come up again in verse 5 and in verse 8. You shall attend to the obligations of the sanctuary, the obligations of the altar, so there no longer be wrath on the sons of Israel. You can make this spooky. I don't think it is. I don't think it's like, you're not doing right and God is smiting you. I think it's, you're not keeping this place clean. You've lost a bunch of Levites, people are getting sick, and you're not doing this the way I told you to do it. I think you've got to look at this as a very human story. It's pretty easy to forget how important the functions of the law were in simple things like hygiene and life. Go back to verse 2 for a minute. Our impact is going to be muted when we, the servants, don't understand our position and our purpose. And in verses 2 and 3, the servants had forgotten what they were to do. Bring with you also your brothers, the tribe of Levi, that they may be joined to you and serve you. the Levites were all into wanting to be priests, but while they were wanting to be priests, they weren't being Levites. Now, I'm picking on this, and I know I did earlier this morning, but I bring it back up to you because it's actually the closest thing I can find in today's world. While we have a bunch of women who want to be pastors, we don't have a bunch of women who are willing to train younger women. We don't. You're not finding 15 older ladies trying to come into your life and help disciple you, are you? Has something happened that I'm unaware of? Or are most of you finding that if we don't make it clear over and over and over as a church that discipleship and mentoring has to be what we're about, and even when we do, it barely happens? So you got people over here trying to take jobs God didn't give them while they're not doing jobs God did give them. You got gals in our congregations that are trying to become the heads of their families while they're not trying to be the mom. If you don't do while you're busy trying to do the thing God didn't tell you to do, you're not busy doing the thing God did tell you to do. And that's one of the huge problems we have. I mean, while people are trying to figure out how they can lead the congregation better than the congregation's leaders are leading it, nobody's following. They're not doing what they need to do. You got to keep the place clean or people get sick. Somebody's got to do all the jobs of ministry. Verse 4, look what it says. They shall be joined with you and attend to you the obligations of the tent of meeting for all the service of the tent, but an outsider may not come near you. Why does he say that? Why does he say in verse 23 that only Levites perform this, and in verse 4, no outsider can come near you? Guys, when the right people don't do to do the job, the wrong people step in to do the job. What's happening is the Levites are no longer there, so now they're just trying to grab anybody they can. Listen, in a congregation of believers like ours, when the people who are gifted with teaching won't function as teachers, then we put people in to teach that aren't teachers. Why? Because we need somebody to fill the space or the little kids will kill each other. So what we end up with is diminished ministry because the people that are called to do it won't step up and say yes. So the Levites aren't doing it, and now they're sticking other people in there. And the bottom line is the priests are putting people in that don't belong doing it, and that's making people sick. Why? Well, they weren't trained to do it, for one thing. They don't know actually how to wash their hands and go to the laver and keep their hands clean between sacrifices. They're grabbing onto people. They're getting people sick. One of the important things is God is still under the impression that He is the creator and we are the created, and He establishes the rules and we follow them. Now, every attempt to make rules different than the ones God made is a manifestation of the spirit of mutiny within man. Rebellion equals every attempt to tell God He's not in charge. Well, how are they doing that? By simply overlooking what God said. That's all you have to do is not do what God said, and that's rebellion. Now, go down to verse 9 for a second. I'm skipping down a little bit just to pick it up. And when you get down to verse 9, it says this. This shall be yours from the most holy gifts reserved from the fire. Every offering of theirs, every grain offering, every sin offering, every guilt offering which they shall render to me shall be most holy for you and your sins. Here's the thing. We have to be entirely dependent upon God for His provision. And He says, I provided for you Levites and you priests through these offerings. Apparently, what verse 9 tells me is some of the Levites were getting food on the side from something else. What happened is they no longer were operating just in what God told them to do. They were now finding other ways to get it done. You know what saps the life out of ministry? When ministry people find something else to be spending all their time on. So I think that's what's happening. And I think as you look at it, I want you to drop all the way down to verse 20. I think you're going to see in verse 20, it says, Then the Lord said to Aaron, You shall have no inheritance in their land, nor any portion among them. I am your portion. Does everybody follow what's going on here? He's saying, look, people are getting sick because you guys aren't doing what I told you to do. You've even incorporated people that I didn't tell you to do it. They're not trained properly. The thing's falling apart. And then he turns and he says to the priests, he says, look, everybody's getting an inheritance. You're not getting one because I am your portion. What is the point of this? You can't be priests to me and focus on this world. Focus on riches in this life. Focus on approval in this culture. If you're going to work for me, you got to trust me for what you get. Now, that doesn't mean they walk around going, I'm not going to do anything today. I'm just trusting God to send me a check. That's not the idea. They had a job they weren't doing because they were busy doing things on the outside so they could get more things in this life. And while they were taking the things in this life, they were losing track of what was going on in the tabernacle, and people were getting sick and dying. Real servants have their most lasting impact when they recognize that they don't own what they use. And that's why verses 25 all the way down to verse 32 tells you that the Lord spoke to Moses, verse 26, moreover you shall speak to the Levites, say to them, when you take from the sons of Israel the tithe, which I have given you from their inheritance, then you will present an offering from it to the Lord, a tithe of the tithe. Here's what he says. Levites, they're going to bring you stuff, and they're going to give it to you because you're the Levite. I want you to take from what I give to you from their hands, from their tithe, and I want you to tithe part of it as well. Let's put it in modern terms. I give, the money that I make from grace, I give a portion of that money back to the Lord to grace. That's kind of weird, isn't it? I mean, I got it from grace and I got to turn around and give it back to him? Yes, because I also have to remember that my provision didn't come from grace, it came from the Lord. That the Lord through grace gave me the provision. So I give it back. The point is that if you don't steward God's gifts as God's gifts, you're going to think you earned the money. I can sit here all day long, teach all day long. I'm not earning anything. Honestly, what it comes down to is whatever I have because God gave it to me. Whatever you have because God gave it to you. And when you give back a portion of it, what you're doing is you're saying, I understand that.